Limp Bizkit.
Here's Korn.
It starts with.
So, new metal is a thing again. This is not something I expected to happen, even though I have been preaching on my channel and especially in my series Rise and Fall of New Metal that new metal was actually good. Of course, not all of it was great, but that applies basically to any subgenre of heavy music. There's always like 5 bands responsible for creating some kind of a new sounding direction in music, and thousands of bands come along and try to ride the wave of success of these forward-thinking, original-sounding bands. However, in case of new metal, the list is longer due to the fact that new metal was actually mainstream and it incorporated many sounds from other subgenres of heavy music. The impact of new metal was so big that even huge acts like Metallica, Slayer, Sepultura succumbed to its influence and incorporated elements of new metal into their sound. But no matter how big it was, new metal was very much frowned upon, maybe because of how big and influential it has become. And the bands that are held responsible for influencing new metal bands were always kinda dismissive and negative towards this subgenre of heavy music. Mike Patton, for example, who is better known as the frontman of Faith No More, a band that is often referred to as a major influence on new metal, had this to say: "New metal makes my stomach turn. Don't blame that poo-poo on us." Don't blame that poo-poo on us. Blame it on their mothers. Do you think I listen to any of that stuff at all? No. It's for 13-year-old morons. Damn, that hurts. And this statement is relatively recent, though I still love Faith No More and Mike Patton alike. I personally started my journey with heavy music in my life beginning with new metal, as I'm sure many of you watching have as well. But I remember back in the day, metal fans of more, let's say, classical metal always told me that new metal is not really metal. But now, 20 years later, from when new metal was at its peak, it somehow became a thing again. It's actually considered kind of cool, and nobody is ashamed to admit that they like new metal. So, what changed and how did we get here is what I want to talk about in today's video. But before we get into that, I have a big favor to ask of you. Please drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe if you are new to this channel and this type of content is your cup of tea. Now, I don't think those of you watching need a history lesson on new metal, and if you do, you can watch my series Rise and Fall of New Metal, where I go in detail on the phenomenon of new metal. But as for this video, I think we need to establish the big 6 in this case, of new metal, so that we can start this conversation. Boom! Here they are. This is a pretty obvious list in my opinion, and if you have a different one, you are wrong. The most obvious and most important reason why we gravitated towards new metal back in the day and why the current generation gravitates to it is the music itself. Before the gimmicks, before commercial success, if there was no good songwriting, nobody would have cared. Now tell me, can you confuse this
I'm not there all the time, you know. Some people call it insane.
with this? Or this with that? Probably not, right? All very different, with different things to offer. Even though Korn, of course, gave new metal a direction in a sonic sense, everyone brought something new of their own into the world of new metal. Korn gave us super heavy down-tuned 7-string guitars with a rather dissonant sound, slapped the bass, and overall a very rhythm-driven music. And Jonathan Davis rounded out that sound with a very unique vocal delivery. Not to mention the use of bagpipes, which gave some of their songs an even more unique sound. And overall, Korn is the band that managed to keep their sound interesting for quite a long time, when comparing to the other bands on the list. Deftones had their own thing going on, with the combination of heavy riffs with Chino's mellow vocal performances over the heavy music, who was exploding into those psychotic high-pitched screams. Even though they were very much rhythm-driven like Korn, Deftones had a very different sound to their rhythm section. And Deftones are pretty much leading this revival of nu metal, which is very surprising to me. Because even back in the day, Deftones was not universally loved or accepted by everyone. In fact, Deftones sold the least amount of records out of the big six, with just over 10 million records sold. So they are the least commercially successful band out of the bunch. Yet, they are trending on TikTok like crazy. I think in some way, it's because when it comes to music on TikTok, it's very much about the vibe on that platform. And Deftones have that in spades. Limp Bizkit, Hate Them or Love Them, were also very unique in their own right. There simply can't be a nu metal list without this band. With creative guitarists like Wes Borland and unique vocal delivery of Fred Durst, and with the addition of DJ Lethal, they were one of a kind. Even when Borland left, Limp Bizkit were a part of an MTV show called MTV Lunch.
In May 2002, MTV News began an intensive 16-month journey with Limp Bizkit as they went in to record their fourth album.
Can you imagine MTV documenting a making of hard rock or a metal record today? Probably not, right? And in recent years, many seem to have turned around on the subject of Fred Durst. The so-called return of Limp Bizkit a couple years back when they released Dead Vibes and an album after that. There was a lot of hype around them at the time. And in a way, this was a sign that people do miss the good old nu metal days. System, undoubtedly a unique sounding band. They managed to incorporate some of the traditional Armenian as well as Eastern elements into their sound. The message and agenda in many of their songs is unique to them and their roots. For that reason, for most metal bands, it would make no sense in trying to replicate their sound. Slipknot took the nu metal sound to the extreme and became the heaviest of the bunch, with Joey Jordison at the drum kit, who borrowed some influences from death metal and became a sort of celebrity drummer in his own right. Again, the band had a very distinct sound, with extra percussion adding to it. They were not afraid to experiment and had several songs over 5 minutes long, with track Iowa being 15 minutes long. Linkin Park is the strangest one for me because in recent years I realized that basically everybody loves this band. I guess it kind of makes sense because they are the most accessible band out of the bunch, but even among metal fans there's a lot of respect and praise towards this band these days. And again, they had an original sound with 2 vocalists, and their first 2 albums being nearly damn perfect makes a lot of sense. And this is for a band that was initially considered to be an industry plant. They still hold the record for the best-selling debut album of the 21st century, and of course, they are the best-selling nu metal band with over 70 million records sold worldwide. They are also referred to as one of the most influential nu metal bands. What connects all of these bands is that while being heavy, they still managed to write catchy, accessible music with plenty of hooks and bigger-than-life choruses. Not to mention that all of them managed to remain unique and original, and originality served as a reason to explore every band. Practically anyone could start their musical journey with a band like Linkin Park and gradually get to something more extreme and adventurous like Slipknot. Not to mention that the lyrics of guys like Jonathan Davis and Chester Bennington were very personal, which made a lot of their fans connect to their music on a whole different level. This is quite common nowadays, but back in the day it was a very different story. Another thing that nu metal did well is that they managed to keep things things interesting. Now, before talking about gimmicks and whatnot, you gotta remember that before Korn, there really was no template for how the bands of nu metal should look like. Korn did what they did, and their aesthetic resonated with the kids, and this aesthetic stuck around for as long as nu metal was a thing. Baggy pants, goatees, spiky hair, dreadlocks, piercings. We see Korn doing this in '94. And Linkin Park and every other band that came along still did pretty much the same thing, with minimal deviations 6 years later and beyond. In many ways, it was just the fashion at the time, but no metalhead was dressing like this prior to Korn. And of course, I gotta mention the band's use of Adidas gear, with Jonathan Davis coming up with some cool designs for his kilts and whatnot. Even though Adidas gear has become pretty much synonymous with Korn, it took nearly 30 years for the two brands to finally make an official collaboration in October of 2023. Now Korn fans can finally rock that official Adidas Korn gear. But most importantly, I feel like Korn have never took their fans for granted.
Korn kids, here's Korn!
From being one of the first, if not the very first, bands to start broadcasting of vlog-type content on their website titled Korn TV, where the band shared some behind-the-scenes footage, to running fan art contest for their album cover art for the 1999 album Issues. And in 2002, a winner of another fan contest got the chance to make his directorial debut by directing the band's music video for their single, Alone I Break. Apart from their influence in music, I honestly feel like Korn don't get nearly enough credit for how innovative they were in every aspect and how interesting they made it being a fan of this band. Slipknot took it to a whole new level by wearing their baggy jumpsuits and masks. They assigned numbers to themselves instead of names, and this kept some sort of mystery around the band for a while.
The best way for us to portray the music is not being about where we came from, it's about being about the music that we want to do.
Back in the day, internet was not what it is today, and I'm sure that many, just like myself, were surfing the web in hopes to find the pictures of the band members unmasked. Not to mention how intense their live shows were due to the large amount of band members. And I think it's important to note that the band's erratic behavior on stage and the presence of their masks never felt gimmicky, at least to me. I fully believed their commitment and transformation on stage.
You know what they fucking want? You know what they fucking need? Yeah! And let's give them the fucking nod, motherfucker! 1, 2, 3! Yeah!
Even today, I feel the same way when I watch their old performances. They somehow managed to make it look authentic. Linkin Park had a strategy of their own to keep their listeners engaged by devoting a lot of time to their official fan club, LP Underground, where the members of the club had access to demos and music never released before. Linkin Park also heavily promoted their records by making a lot of music videos, while other bands on the list usually had 2 to 3 music videos per record. Linkin Park had 5 for Hybrid Theory and 5 for Meteora. And what better way to keep your audience engaged than to release music videos for about half of your album? Even in recent years, Linkin Park keep their fans engaged by releasing anniversary editions of their albums with music never heard before and visual footage never seen before. Their marketing has always been on point. Limp Bizkit, of course, had Fred Durst with his mainstream celebrity status, thanks to which Fred was on many magazine covers and made many TV appearances, while brushing shoulders with many mainstream celebrities of that time. As a result, Fred pretty much became a poster child of nu metal. Not only did Fred's red cap become synonymous with Limp Bizkit and nu metal in general, the band also had a more colorful character, like Wes Borland, who frequently changed his stage attire by wearing makeup and other unusual accessories. Some of his looks have as well become rather iconic over the years. years. Also, just like Linkin Park, Limp Bizkit released 5 music videos for their most commercially successful record, Chocolate Starfish and the Hot Dog Flavored Water, among which was a music video for their single Take a Look Around, which also became an official original soundtrack and the main theme for the Mission Impossible 2 movie. It says a lot about Bizkit's popularity at the time when they were chosen to write a main theme for a Hollywood film with the budget of $125 million, which had Tom Cruise as the lead. Even System of a Down early on had a rather colorful look, which they did not maintain that long as they mostly dropped their makeup with the release of their second album in 2001. However, their music was covering such topics as politics, oppression, religion, state of modern culture and its influence, and most notably and uniquely, Armenian genocide. Most of the above are the topics that other bands in nu metal simply never went into, which created another layer to System of a Down for their fans to dig into. The sound of their music was not the only unique thing about this band. And overall, nu metal was basically the last wave of heavy bands that were perceived and carried themselves as true rock stars, with some bands embracing it more than others. But since then, the concept of a rock star has shifted to other modern artists who have little to do with actual rock or metal music. While modern rock and metal artists don't seem like they want to carry a title of a rock star, with very few exceptions, while these older bands are still perceived as such. Now that we've covered what made nu metal great back in the day, it's time to talk about why the resurgence of nu metal is happening.
So who's at your shows? Every age?
These days, every night I'll say, how many people is your first time seeing Limp Bizkit? The whole place raises their hand.
Oh,
how
really?
many people are under 30 years old? The whole place raises their hand. I'm so grateful, but it's just, there's a resurgence. It's just happening. It's young people that are reacting to the material.
For those of us who grew up on these bands, of course nostalgia plays a factor, and we definitely have an impact on the recent rise of nu metal's popularity. Some of us have children and we pass down our love for this music to our kids. But most attribute the rise of nu metal's popularity to TikTok. It's a popular opinion, but I think it's not that simple. The way the algorithm of TikTok works is it's catering to the interests of each user. If a user is listening to Drake, it's going to recommend other rap artists. It's not going to recommend a band like Slipknot. For the platform to recommend metal music to a user, the user needs to have an interest in the heavy music to begin with. I believe that TikTok plays a big role in exploring heavy music for those who already take an interest in it. But it doesn't get people into heavy music if they don't care for it. I did a little research and found that many Gen Z kids don't attribute this renaissance of nu metal to TikTok alone. A lot of their interest comes from their parents and their own research. They look for music, and it just so happens that they like same things we liked back in the day. Most likely it's because it's accessible and is on everybody's lips as of recent. By the way, the nu metal fashion of 90s and 2000s has also been on the rise among Gen Z, which is obvious when you watch nu metal related content on TikTok. And the resurgence of nu metal also reflects on the numbers that these bands are pulling, with every band having over 10 million monthly listeners on Spotify as of today. In the past 5 years, monthly listeners of these bands have more than doubled. I mean, System of a Down, a band that has not released an album since 2005, has 18 million monthly listeners, while Linkin Park has a whopping 38 million monthly listeners, who are currently in the top 50 of most streamed artists on Spotify. Even though the growing stream numbers are a trend in general, since more and more people are transitioning to streaming platforms, this is still impressive. Likewise, both System of a Down and Linkin Park have videos that surpassed over 1 billion views on YouTube, which seems basically impossible for modern metal bands, as heavy music in general is far from mainstream. For example, Bring Me the Horizon's most popular video on YouTube, which is 10 years old at this point, has just under 200 million views, which proves that it's not time equals more views by default. It's just a fact that all of these bands did something special, culturally significant, and are still still very much relevant, with their fan bases still growing thanks to Gen Z. Besides, there is no band like Linkin Park in modern musical landscape. No band has come along that is as accessible and as appealing as Linkin Park. And I feel like every band I have been talking about today fits this mold to varying degrees. While it's awesome to see that Gen Z takes an interest in music I grew up on myself, just like most of my viewers, I do see a few problems with this trend. First of all, everyone seems to gravitate towards the most successful songs and albums by each band. Most listeners are not as hyped about the new material of any of these bands as they are about their old stuff. None of these bands had been able to match the success they had in the late 90s and early 2000s. Even though the success and demand of a festival such as Sick New World is very much apparent, we need to keep in mind that most of these guys are in their 50s and are past their prime. It's very unlikely we will get another Toxicity, Iowa, Hybrid Theory, White Pony, and Chocolate Starfish. Not to mention that System of a Down may never release another record at this point. Linkin Park most likely will never release another record as well because of Chester's passing. There's been a lot of negative things happening with Slipknot which left many fans bitter. Limp Bizkit have not been able to release an impactful record since 2000, so we're left with Korn and Deftones, who are not getting any younger. So at this point, a new generation of bands needs to come along and take over. And actually, it looks like there is a shift happening, because not only was 2023 great for nu metal, it was also very good for modern metal by extension, with Sleep Token garnering quite a bit of attention by releasing the most streamed metal album of 2023. And even though it looks like modern metal still has a long way to go, it's very refreshing to realize that MGK and trap metal no longer seem like the future of rock and heavy music in general. But what's next for nu metal? Will these old school nu metal bands double down and get back to their old nu metal sound, since there's obviously a demand for it? Or will there be a new wave of nu metal bands that will take the spotlight? It remains to be seen, because music and entertainment business in general is very unpredictable. Regardless, I'm very happy to see that nu metal is no longer considered to be some shameful period of metal history, with Gen Z carrying their love for nu metal into the future. And at this point, there is no denying how huge nu metal's influence truly is. Because in recent years, I began to hear more nu metal influence practically in every band that is out today, which is not a surprise, since most of modern metal musicians grew up listening to nu metal. Oh my god, this video took a lot to make. I started making this one way back in summer, and it took me much longer than I expected for various reasons. But it was great making a video about bands I love so much. If you watched the video up to this point, I appreciate it a lot. And if you are new here, you may be interested in checking out my other videos where I have covered all of the bands I spoke about today. And if this type of content is your cup of tea, please consider subscribing and ringing that bell. Leave your comments down below, drop a like, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.